Hello, thank you for joining me in this tutorial on how to read a chart for Mosaic Crochet with X's, and specifically overlay Mosaic Crochet. You may hear the terms inset, overlay. My patterns are all overlay. And you may be confused. Mosaic, interlocking. Interlocking crochet is not a mosaic technique. It is 2 layers of mesh. And my charts can be done for both interlocking crochet and overlay mosaic crochet. In this tutorial, we are assuming that you have tried mosaic crochet, that you are familiar with the way it creates these tails on the side, and that there are 2 stitches, the double crochets that drop down and use the front loop, and the single crochets that are just using the back loop. So if you are not familiar with those types of things, can you please watch my other videos first? Because I don't want you to feel confused here. This tutorial is just on how to use these charts that have X's all over them and no other explanation. What kind of designer does that? Just throws all these papers in there. I don't know how to use that. You would not believe how many people have messaged me, and sometimes not so kindly, saying, I don't know how to do this. My patterns include written instructions, a full explanation of the stitches. I have tutorials on how to do the stitches, and this adding of the charts with X's was actually relatively new for my patterns. So some of my patterns don't have a full explanation, and I understand that some people go, what is this? And I'm sorry. So finally, I'm getting around to the video tutorial explaining it. I do have a 1-page explanation that I include with the patterns, and I think I even missed that in some of the patterns. So if you don't have any explanation at all and you're like, my pattern didn't come with that, you can just send me a message and I'll update that right away, okay? So today we are going to be looking at GoldieLux. It's a pattern of mine that I came out with a while ago. This was my half-done sample. I still have a stitch marker in there, not that it's going to help us today, but I thought maybe I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and I'll get this done and teach you how to use the chart, okay? So this chart, I printed it from the pattern, and it is 4 pages. You can see it says page 1 of 4 here, even though the PDF itself actually has written instructions and a key and probably a copyright page saying, please don't sell my patterns because I made them, not you. The chart, if you have the instruction page, it says that you have to start at the bottom right corner on the last page, and you read each row right to left, which is the opposite if you're left-handed. The pages are arranged from the top left corner. Oh, I bet you can't see my hand's not pointing in the screen anymore, is it? Okay, let's see if I can do this. The pages are arranged from the top left corner. Let me see if I'm in the video. Oh, I am in the video. Okay, good. We can put it right about there. Okay. Top left corner, page 1. Page 1, page 2, it goes down. Page 3, and then page 4. Now that means when you're reading, if you're not going to print them out, you're going to read from page 4 bottom, and then you're going to jump to page 2 bottom. Because see, row says 1. Starts at 1 at the bottom, and this one also says 1 at the bottom, and this says 1, and when you get to stitch 25 on row 1, you have to find the page that shows you stitch 26 on row 1. Okay, so this is a lot of pages. We're just going to start with probably something in the middle, actually, because my work is already started, and I didn't actually make this sample off of this. This was when I was coming up with the design. And you can see I started with green, and then I have all these white lines. And if you're comparing that to the chart, the blue would correspond to my dark green and the white of the white. But it actually starts with a foundation row that is more similar to my interlocking patterns. Where'd it go? Page 4. You can see here it's dark, light, dark, and then dark, light, dark. That is how I lock the interlocking 2 layers of mesh together, which is why when I adjust the patterns, nowadays I've been deleting those extra lines. When I designed this one, I didn't delete them, I just added X's. And this was the first pattern where I also removed those mesh dots from the inner. So I have a different chart here. This is Monogrammed I. It's a 41 by 41 square, which makes it a 20 window pattern. If you're familiar with my other interlocking patterns, if you pick a whole bunch that are 20 windows, they'll be easy to join because they're the same size. And you can still do mosaic crochet knowing that 20 windows refers to a chart that is the same size each time, 41 by 41. And you can see this has these dots all over the place, which some people get very annoyed at, and I apologize that I cannot please everyone. So I'm trying to find my brand here, and that is one of the things that we are changing. So these little dots are from the interlocking technique. You can crochet it. It looks like a crochet pattern. Oh, I didn't bring the right samples here. Okay, so this is the interlocking. You can see when you're making those interlocking things, it has these mesh dots in it because this is a layer of mesh that you've crocheted, right? And so the dots show up on the chart. You don't have to include those dots when you're doing mosaic. You can smooth it out and then you get this kind of a thing, right? Which is why this pattern, the GoldieLux, is thick and luxurious, but we do have that double borderline on the chart. So you can skip it if you want. The other thing to be aware of, I know you're like, just get to the good stuff. I know people get impatient. Hang with me here. This is one of my older charts and it starts on row 1. And if you are reading the pattern and you're trying to compare it, the pattern, written pattern, starts with row 0. It has foundation row. And if you're just going to read off the chart, this is fine because row 1 just looks like this and row 2 looks like that, and it's fine. If you want it to match what you've done on the written, you have to adjust the row numbers because this is actually row 0 for a foundation row. We are going to start up here in the middle of the pattern. Oh, you can see the back is very nice too. And then I'll go back and explain how to start it with the foundation, okay? We know that every other row we're switching colors. So if you've done mosaic before, now you know. And I always start with a slip knot. And then you have to join it here. This is my joining stitch. This joining stitch doesn't actually show on the chart. You can see it's green, white, green, white, green, white. And on here, it's just all green or blue. So you need, if you read the instructions, you need to know that there's a joining stitch that is not shown on the chart. And if you had a chart that was repeating, like this one, actually, I could make it quite a bit smaller and just show the repeat section. So again, it's like an older pattern and I didn't design it for that. So I am making my newer patterns a little bit more flexible, trying to, grow and adjust, and there's the try to do everything just like all the other designers do so no one gets confused, but don't copy the other designers because that would be bad, right? Balance. So this one, you could actually pick out the repeating section and it would be a lot smaller than the 4-page chart. So that's on my to-do list as well. Okay, so this is where we're at in the chart. We have this as a reference point. We've done a row of blue or green, and the next row we're going to have white above it. We know that it says row 26 is using white, so I've joined my white yarn. We know that you don't get to see it on the chart. The joining stitch is just extra. And the first stitch here is blue and it has no X on it. And the first thing you need to know about reading these charts with the X's, it doesn't matter what color it is at all. The colors are there to help you reference your picture. If I gave you a chart that was all white and had X's on it, technically you could still come up with the same design here. It would just be a lot harder to find your place because you wouldn't have the color references. So whether it is blue or white, you are using your white yarn. If it has no X, you're doing that single crochet in the back loop only. The next little box, each box is a stitch. It has an X. It is white, but it doesn't matter what color. X means you do your drop down. So we're yarn over and we find the front loop below. Then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches that have no X's. And we know they go right into the back loops of these 5 stitches here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you like the counting, that's where the written instructions come in handy. Now, because this one started with row 1 instead of row 0, you would actually have to look for your accent color, or contrasting color. I call it both, contrast, accent. MC is main color, that's the dark one, the blue. And CC would be contrasting color, that's the white. And we're doing a contrasting row. It says 26, but you have to bump everything up because we put a 0 underneath it. So it's actually row 25 on the pattern, the written, okay? And then the next stitch is our X. And the handy thing about using the chart instead of the written instructions that count is that instead of counting, I could just look for those cues. I can't put a double crochet down into here because there's no white for me to double crochet into. So I know those are all single crochets. And I know that above this thing, there's 3 again. So I can use those as cues to keep me on track. You'll notice this 3 and these 5, they're both single crochets. Doesn't matter what color you see, there's no X's. But it is something that will keep you on track and keep you ready for the next stitch if you know where you are on the chart. You know, I hope that makes sense. So we're crocheting along. We go, okay, now it's time for those white ones. And the reality is, if you understand how the charts work, because this is blue, you know that on the next row, we're going to be covering them. So you've just created these 5 stitches, they'll be covered. These 3 will be visible. That's what the colors mean. Not super handy for crocheting because it doesn't matter right now what's going to happen in the future. We're going to focus on the moment, and we are only doing single crochets because there are no X's until we get to this white one, which happens to line up. You could count them if you wanted, or you could say, hey, it lines up with this long thing here. We're going to do a dropped double crochet. So that is how that works. You see that? I hope is clear as mud. I always hated that as a kid. Clear as mud. So ridiculous. Okay, so I do babble too much on my videos. I'm sorry. The point is, if there is an X, you do a drop double crochet. If there is no X, you do a single crochet. You can look at this and you can see that regardless of the colors, the only drops are for these long lines. And you have to know that on a chart, there is no joining stitch where we put our yarn together, and there's no end stitch where we're going to cut the yarn off. I do have a tutorial also on reading a chart without X's. So for example, this one, because it's all filled in, it's for Mosaic Crochet. But if you downloaded this pattern, you would see that the interlocking chart is there as well. And the interlocking chart doesn't have any X's, and it doesn't have solid here. It would have those mesh dots showing up. And if you really prefer to crochet those dots in it, and you don't care about the X's, you could use those charts. I actually have had someone asking me about what they can do. They like the dots. It saves them on yarn, and it keeps everything locked in tighter. You can see this is making pockets where you have lots of double crochets in a row, and some people really don't like that. So the mesh dots keep it all locked in. Now, because we aren't actually following the chart for this pattern, we have ended. We're just kind of going till it ends. And, oops, come here you. That is the last stitch here, the joining stitch. If you're familiar with my other stuff, it goes under both loops. It keeps everything really secure, and then you cut it. So we're going to do row 27 as well, just so that you can get the hang of seeing that the X's mean double crochets. We're doing that join stitch that is nowhere to be seen on the chart, and a drop double crochet is because our very first, I moved the paper and you can see the very first one here has an X. So we're going to drop it. Then there is no X, so we know that that one is hiding behind here. Then we have 5 X's because we are filling that row. And another single crochet because there is no X. The white line just helps us keep our place on the chart, but we know that there's no X there. Then we have all these double crochets. You can count them if you wanted to. If you like the stitch counts, that's where the written comes in handy, because then it tells you how many to do. I know that it is 5. And then we have 3 stitches here that don't have X's. Some are white and some are blue. It doesn't matter what color they are. They have no X's. They are single crochets in the back loop only. That's how we do overlay mosaic crochet. Then we go back to those X's and we're dropping it down. And then we have another white that has a single crochet. So that's how we are following those. The other thing to be aware of when you've got a chart, foundation row, how do you start a foundation row? This is where I don't feel like it's chart reading. It's really more of how to do crochet, the mosaic crochet technique, which I have a different video on. This is a foundation row. If it says 0 or 1, it doesn't actually matter when you're crocheting. It's just that when it says 0, it lines up with the written instructions better. If it says 1, it still means that you have to do a foundation crochet. And then if you're reading the pattern and you went to your accent color, contrasting color for row 2, your contrasting color on the written pattern actually says row 1. So that is confusing, I know, for some people. I am working on getting everything updated so it's all aligned, but that will take me a while. Foundation row, because it has no X's, is all single crochet. And you can do foundation single crochet, or you can do the like a chain and then you crochet back. I do have a different video on doing those foundations, but I'll just show you real quick. So you could chain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example. Then you skip that chain for turning and you'd crochet back, single crochet, and you'd have 1, 2, 3, and of course 4. Or if you prefer not to chain, because sometimes you start with a really big project, right? It's sometimes easier to count if you can just add stitches on as you go. So you chain 2, that just get you started. Then you go back into that first chain. And we're gonna, that counts as the chain at the bottom. And then going through 2 loops counts as your single crochet. Then you have to go back into that chain, pull up a loop. This counts as the chain at the bottom. This counts as your single crochet. So you've made 2 stitches. Go into the chain, pull up a loop. That's the chain at the bottom. This counts as your single crochet. Pull up a loop. That's the chain at the bottom. That's your single crochet. And that would be 4 stitches as well. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is where you would cut it if you were done. Of course, that won't get you much of a project, 4 stitches wide. And when you're doing the foundation row, that's when you have to remember that the joining stitch and the end stitch are not shown on the chart. So if this is 25 wide, which actually our whole chart goes 41 wide, you need to do 43 because you need the joining stitch and the end stitch as well. And once you have your foundation chain, you grab your next color, which row 2 is a white. That's a white row. So even though this is blue at the beginning, doesn't matter. It has no X's. They are all single crochet in the back loops. Then when you grab the same color that you started with, so green or pink, it starts with an X, and that's why it covers up that white stitch. and then that's where the color comes from. So if I had no color on here, it might be easier for you to realize where the X's were going, but then you wouldn't be able to match it up to your pattern to figure out where you were. So that is that. If you're left-handed, everything is of course backwards.